be justification, because justification by grace alone, through faith, I think is the central Protestant insight, and I think it's a biblical insight. And therefore, that's something I think that we need to insist upon. Now, what I find in talking to Catholic friends is that their understanding of the doctrine of justification at Trent is really the same as mine. They don't think that they earn salvation.
Now, here is where, once again, the mere Christianity concept and synergism, vitally important to understanding why William Lane Craig comes down where he comes down. If you're a synergist, if you have prevenient grace, if you have grace that doesn't save, if you have the death of Christ making man savable, then that explains this. Because when I talk with Roman Catholics, I don't come to this conclusion. I see a huge and a vast difference between us. Because I recognize that apart from God's saving grace, I could do nothing. And it's not just prevenient grace. It's not just a grace that helps me do something. It's God's actual accomplishment. And so I hold to justification by faith. I cling to it as my only and sole hope before a holy God, because I recognize the truth of who I am as a synergist who does not believe that I am dead in sins, but that I can cooperate with this prevenient grace to bring about its accomplishment. That's what gives rise to this. That's why there are two fundamental responses here. And it all goes back to theology. It all goes back to what you believe. And that's why we have criticized the William Lane Craig, Mike Licona, Mere Christianity, apologetic methodology, because, again, it goes back to theology. Your theology determines your apologetics, not the other way around. Well, it should. Your theology should determine your apologetics. Far too often, it is the other way around, and that creates disaster.
Think that they perform meritorious works that earn salvation. The way they interpret it is that God, by his grace, gives me the power to live a good life, and therefore I go to heaven, and it's all due to God's grace. It's wholly by grace alone. So the line of distinction becomes very blurred or very fine.
I very blurred, very fine? With a Roman Catholic who's going to Mass 4 times a week to get grace, but yet not being perfected by it? Theology matters.
And I think that in many cases, practicing Catholics may not be much different than Protestants. Do you see what I mean? That there may be these conciliar statements on paper, but the way certain born-again Catholics really live and what they really believe may be much closer to what Protestants think than what these conciliar statements literally say.
Sounds like he's saying that they're Catholic in name, but not actually in having a consistency between their practice and their theology. Now, over and over again, people say, well, you're saying no Roman Catholic can be saved. Well, I know lots of Roman Catholics who have been saved. But there are people who say, well, do you think there are any who die as Roman Catholics who can be saved? And my answer has always been the same. If they're saved, it's in spite of the church, not because of the church. It's because they believe in the gospel, not in the Roman gospel. That gospel does not save. There's no question about that. Again, if you can explain Galatians away, if you can get it out of the canon or something, then you might have somewhere to go. But if you can't, there's something you can do about it. But what we're hearing here is, hey, from our perspective as synergists, we've got a lot in common here. The divisions aren't quite as big as we thought they were. Well, the reason for what's being said here is the conciliar statements. Trent, they knew what the issues were. You're ignoring what those issues are. And are there Roman Catholics who ignore what those issues are? Sure. But that makes them less consistent, less well-read Catholics, just as it makes you a less consistent Protestant to be compromising on these key issues as well.
Protestants are often drawn to the beauty, reverence, and the high church style of the Catholic Church. And they think, well, maybe we're a little too loosey-goosey in ours, and they're drawn to that.
Oh, not even an argument here. If all you've experienced are laser light shows and fog machines and skinny jeans, you're going to be looking for something different. And smells and bells can become very attractive to folks, very, very attractive to folks. But like I've said so many times before, when I talk to people who have professed, not nominal evangelicals who are just, it's by tradition, just what I grew up with, people who claim to have had a true conviction of the gospel, that they believed in justification, and Christ is my only righteousness, and they start going for the smells and bells. I have, and most of you know by name, some of the individuals that I've talked to, looked at them and said, how can you tell me that you are going to trade union with Christ, His perfect righteousness, your being in Him, which is the only place where there is forgiveness and sanctification, eternal life, the perfection of the mediator in the presence of the Father, you're going to trade that for the treadmill of penances and sacraments? Look me in the eye and tell me why you're going to do that. They can't. They can't. They just can't do it because they never really believed it. They may have professed it, may have even preached it loudly. Can't do it.
From time to time. But we still need to look at doctrine. We still need to look at...
Well, I think so, Kevin. That's the bottom line. I mean, I am tremendously attracted to this great tradition, this great historic Catholic tradition, and to the great thinkers that have graced that church, and to the beauty of the worship service, of the ceremonies.
Oh, my. Again, I understand it. I get it. I get it. Remember a few years ago? I forget what year it was. I've only been to Italy once, and it was an interesting trip. But I went to the Vatican, and I created a huge firestorm when I talked about how gaudy it seemed to me. It did. Gold and marble, and the Church that Christ founded didn't have a misapplied text from Matthew 16 in gold around the top of the building. It was a complete contradiction